Greetings. I'm Deanne Finken. I'm chairing the Local News and Democracy Committee, and I want to get started here because we've got a lot to cover. Thank you for joining us today, and thank you too if you participated in the consensus process last year, where we were able to reach
there it is. You're there.
And get this position passed. It is a responsibility of the government to provide support for conditions under which credible local journalism can survive and thrive. I want to make a point at this juncture to note that the Washington League is going to seek national concurrence on this position at the convention in June. Toward that end, we are looking for as many delegates from Washington as possible to go become delegates and to go to Washington, D.C. to help garner additional support for this measure. Because if we have a national position that is reached by virtue of concurrence with our Washington position, that will allow states and local leagues throughout the country to lobby on behalf of advocacy for local news. I should point out that just last week, the State of Colorado League did concur with our position, and so they've adopted it. And we have interest from Virginia, as well as Massachusetts and Maine. So I should point out too that this position that the top that I just read does not specifically call on government to provide funding to rebuild local news. Rather, that government has a responsibility to ensure that conditions are such that local journalism can survive and thrive. And it reflects the belief that the Washington membership came up with, that local news plays a vital role in our society by providing us access to knowledge and information about our government and our communities that enable us to be empowered voters and defenders of democracy. And this reflects the reality of something that the founders came up with. They believed that local news and access to local news was crucial to our democracy, so they saw fit to enshrine protection for a free press in the Constitution, as well as establish a postal service that provided reduced rates for the vehicle of the day to distribute news, that is print newspapers. Last year's study, The Decline, provided some very sobering information, as many of you know, and that's that Washington is really a microcosm of the national crisis, where we've already lost 1/4 of our local newspapers and are on tap to lose 1/3 by 2025. We're doing so at a rate of 2.5 newspapers a week are shuttering.
Wow.
And we've heard, there's basically 6 links: lower voter turnout, lower participation, lower numbers of candidates for local office, higher government costs, greater political polarization, reduced civic engagement, and more challenges handling public health campaigns. Washington did have 2 bright spots this last year in the legislature, and that was funding to secure a early career fellowship working out of Washington State University that will place early career reporters in newsrooms in underserved communities. Senator Karen Kaiser was behind that measure. And it's a $2.4 million budget to fund 8 early career journalists this coming year and another 8 the following year, and hopefully that will continue. We were also able to support legislation that was supported by the Attorney General's office, and that resulted in a 100% exemption from paying the B&O tax for local publishers. Unfortunately, those 2 measures will be fall very short of turning the tide, of making it better for local news. So we will be looking at other legislation. We will also be looking at or supporting 2 measures related to local news and democracy, and that is support for expansion of media literacy programs and digital citizenship. So we have 2 speakers today. The first is Briar Dudley. Briar is the editor of the Free Press Initiative at the Seattle Times, and we've asked him here to talk about what other states are doing and municipalities around the country to tackle this issue of the demise of local news, in the hopes that perhaps one of these other measures might be something that we lobby for, we introduce, and we know we have a handful of lawmakers who are eager to further legislation. So Briar is going to be talking to us here, and then in a few minutes after that, I'll talk briefly about the 2 pieces of legislation related to news media literacy, and then Joanne Lasowski will make this more tangible for you all. Joanne is a member from Tacoma Pierce. She's a professor emerita from Pacific Lutheran University, where she taught journalism, and she's an expert in media literacy. And she's an author of a book, War on Worlds, Who Will Protect the Journalists. She's also was a 3-time Fulbright Scholar. First, however, I'm going to turn us over, I hope, to Briar. Is that right here, Briar?
Yeah, I'm here. I don't have any slides. I'll just talk if that's okay.
That's okay. And that's Briar right there too, but I'm going to take this off and let him talk away. Okay. And Briar, I am going to stop you after 25 minutes. And then so we can move on with Joanne, but do you want to take questions during your presentation, or do you want to take them at the end?
Both are fine. I'll try and maybe talk for 15 minutes or so, and then maybe we can have 10 minutes to talk. But if anybody wants to interrupt as I'm going, please feel free. That's fine too.
Okay, great.
Okay, well, thank you very much. You all might be familiar with what we do, but just to recap, the Seattle Times, since in 2019, started a public service initiative called the Save the Free Press Initiative. And the idea is to raise public awareness of the local journalism crisis, as Deanne described, and advocate for solutions. I'm on the opinion page. I write columns. We put out a newsletter, which you're welcome to subscribe to. The newsletter is free. The columns we write are also free. We make them available to other newspapers to run for free. And we have a website where all this stuff is compiled at st.news/SaveTheFreePress. Again, it's st.news/SaveTheFreePress. You can see all the stuff that we've done here and everything I work on. Some of the effort is focused locally, some of it's focused regionally, and some of it's focused federally. The federal stuff is ultimately the solution to the local journalism crisis that Deanne described so well, and that the League described very well in its report a couple of years ago. There are 2 big proposals that we're very enthusiastic about that in Congress that have gotten really close to passing and not quite there yet. I don't know if it'll happen this year. This is a very complicated year in Congress, as I'm sure you're all aware. But the big outlines are, one of them is to address what we see as unfair competition with the dominant tech platforms, namely Google and Facebook, which are the gateways to news for many people nowadays. A lot of people could just go to, you want to find out what's going on, you might just Google it, and the results you will see are drawn from local news sources. There's little snippets in there and headlines and pictures and things like that. So people tend to kind of get everything they need right there, and they don't come through to the news sites. So we're spending money to report the news, but we're not making money when people consume it online, and we need to figure out a better way to fix that. Part of that is that we've put up paywalls. I'm sure you're familiar with that. You can come to a news website and you might be able to see a couple of stories, but then you got to pay. Similarly, we want to figure out ways to, remind people that this is valuable, it costs money, and we need to get paid for it. And we need Google to pay for it as well, and we need Facebook to pay for it. So there's a federal proposal sponsored by Senator Amy Klobuchar, Minnesota, that would require the platforms to negotiate with us. Canada passed something very similar in June, and they just reached a deal with Google under that policy where Google is going to pay $100 million a year to support local news. That's going to be divided up among different news publishers there. and it's good progress, I guess. I'm a little disappointed by the size of the deal. It's much less than was expected. The earlier estimates were 170 plus million per year is what the platform, Google, owed news publishers. There was a recent study done in the US that said Google in the United States owes publishers about $10 billion a year. So we will see. Now, when I talk about these things, sometimes it sounds like we're just trying to get some, but I want to be clear that the goal really isn't just to tax the platforms or, collect a bill as much as it is to reset the industry and help us find a sustainable path forward. And the sustainable path is going to require us having a better way to make money online, since that's where most people get their news nowadays. And if we're going to survive as largely online businesses, then we have to have a good, mutually beneficial relationship with the gateways like Google and Facebook. So that's really what that's all about.
I'm going to just jump right in here. And of course, we can't take a position as a state league on that federal potential federal legislation unless we have a national position, and that's what we're hoping to accomplish. I should also say that it's interesting, there isn't, or maybe we'll be speaking about this, that California is trying a localized version of the Klobuchar bill, but maybe you'll talk about that.
Exactly. That was, yes. Though, as this proposal has kind of stalled in Congress, it's been there for a couple of years now, getting close, and it doesn't advance. States are picking up the baton there. California, there was a proposal by a assemblywoman named Buffy Wicks, actually University of Washington political science graduate, and that one it got advanced, but then it was killed at the last minute. They said they were putting it off till 2024. We shall see. They're actually having a hearing on it next week, and it'll be very interesting if the home state of Google and Facebook passes a state level version. It would basically require the platforms to negotiate payment with publishers to, help fairly compensate them for the profit that the platforms make with online news. There are similar proposals in other states too. California is the most advanced. That's kind of one approach and none of these are a silver bullet. Honestly, we need a whole variety of things. But so one step, rebalance the relationship with the platforms. There's a federal proposal. California is the lead at the state level. A couple of other states are talking about that, but there's nothing really as developed as California so far. Another approach is tax credits to kind of immediately stop the bleeding. These would be kind of credits based on the number of reporters and editors and photographers in a newsroom. There's a federal proposal that came out 2 or 3 years ago. Actually, our Representative Newhouse was an initial co-sponsor of that. It also got close, never quite passed. It was going to be part of the Build Back Better Act. It got cut at the last minute, but that has inspired a number of state level versions of that. Oregon, in our neck of the woods, is fairly close. They have a proposal to kind of have some tax credits that would help fund the University of Oregon's Agora Center for Journalism and do some research and things like that. But it would also kind of trickle down into nonprofits and provide basically save newsroom jobs. We'll see how that one goes. A couple of Wisconsin also talked about a tax credit proposal very similar to the federal idea. It almost passed. Interestingly, in Wisconsin, that was proposed by Republicans. This is, I try not to get partisan about it, but just it's a fact that the proposals so far at the state level are primarily coming from Democratic blue states. The Washington things that Deanne mentioned. Washington's pretty far out ahead of a lot of other states. Washington's delegation is almost universally supportive of this stuff. In fact, we're real leaders in that regard. All the members of our delegation, except Cathy McMorris Rodgers, are supportive of the tax credits, and Senator Cantwell has been a lead sponsor on the Senate version of these tax credits. So we're way out in front. Again, California obviously is, blue as well. The leadership is great. The momentum is great. It raises awareness of the problem, but we still need a federal solution. And the problem also with the news deserts, the places that really, really need to have their news industry saved or restored, they're mostly in rural areas and suburban areas. Big cities, coastal cities, Seattle, we have all kinds of challenges, but we have a relative abundance in Seattle, at least, of local news. Seattle Times is doing pretty well. We have some innovative business models. We have local TV broadcasters, radio, a lot of little startups and things like that, digital sites. But the farther you get from these kind of coastal metro cities, that's where you really start to see the problem. And unfortunately, we're not seeing solutions out in the hinterlands either. And also, a lot of the places that really are suffering from the local news crisis are red states, Midwest, South, and we haven't seen the same political momentum in those places as we have here. I should mention a third approach that's kind of emerged recently is an idea for news vouchers. There are two proposals on the table right now, one in Washington, D.C. and one in Seattle. There's some kind of progressive political types in Seattle are working on a news voucher proposal. We're a little bit at Seattle Times, a little bit skeptical about that. I wrote a column a couple of weeks ago. If you want to take a look, I kind of have a multi-point, rebuttal to that proposal. I don't have time to go into all of that right now, but basically the concern is it's kind of skewed in favor of a certain business model, and it kind of perpetuates the notion that news ought to be free. And we really think that ultimately the news industry needs to get back on its own 2 feet and survive and be sustainable without federal support, without state and local support. We don't really want to be permanently dependent on government or even nonprofit support. We need to find, the news industry lost about $30 billion a year in revenue. There is no way that philanthropies and government will be able to ever restore that. The only way to do that is to kind of get our business flywheel spinning again, I think. And so a lot of these proposals I'm talking about are kind of temporary. The federal tax credits, that was a 5-year plan. The force to Google and Facebook to negotiate with us, that was a short window, an antitrust exemption that Klobuchar proposed to sort of temporarily enable us to negotiate. And the idea is we're kind of going through this transition from print to digital, from the way people are reading news nowadays, and we kind of need to get over this hump. And hopefully these solutions we'll have a number of them that'll happen, and state things will be happening too, and altogether will hopefully get us back on our feet, stop the loss of jobs. We've lost 2/3 of our newsroom jobs over the last 15 years, and more layoffs are happening all the time. We had record layoffs last year. I'm anticipating more in 2024 because of the way the ad climate is. So we need a short-term solution and a long-term solution. Washington State's a little bit hindered because we have our constitutional prohibitions on directly benefiting private companies, which I think is a great, interesting thing that Washington State does. So we might not have as much flexibility as other states to kind of directly subsidize news businesses. So the fellowship that Deanne mentioned, that's really interesting. That Senator Kaiser proposed, it's creating 8 news fellowships to be placed in kind of underserved communities. It'll roll up to 16 in the next cohort, and hopefully maybe grow even further. But the state can't directly grant a for-profit company like the Seattle Times money to go hire people. We can't do that. So they created this fellowship that Washington State University is administering. People will basically, they're state employees, which is a little bit of a complicating factor to have state employees, but they're state employees working for 2 years through WSU, working at the newspapers. That fellowship is actually California. The Washington kind of followed California on that. California has one with 25 people in their first cohort. That's big.
$24 million. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. It's a big one by Cal Berkeley. New Mexico has a much smaller one. Other states are also following suit with this. I think this is important regardless of the news challenges. I think it's wonderful to feed the pipeline and strengthen journalism education. There are multiple. We have to figure out our revenue problem. We have to figure out our demand problem. Get more people reading the news. We also need to be sure that people still want to work in news, and that we want to continue to support journalism education. And newspapers used to have pretty rich, robust internship programs and things like that. They don't as much because they're losing money now. So this kind of fills a little bit of that void and kind of helps keep the job pipeline filled. So that's terrific. Another line of proposals come out in New York, started this, and Chicago's following, is to direct municipalities to spend more of their advertising in local news. This came up during the pandemic in New York, where the city of New York spends just an absurd amount of money on local advertising. I mean, it's like $1 billion a year or something on local ads. It's just nuts. And it turned out a lot of that was going to places like Google and Facebook and national advertisers. Meanwhile, New York has just a really interesting variety of local news outlets, ethnic news outlets, things like that, neighborhood news outlets that were really suffering during the pandemic. So there was a great proposal to convince the city to divert more money, more of that advertising dollar to support local news. And they've done that. They set up a kind of an agency within the city that manages that to be sure that they have a good share of that is going to support local news. Chicago has now emulated that. They've got a version of it. Other places are proposing it. I mean, it was great in the pandemic. It's a really interesting idea. I think just as a matter of principle, those municipalities and any advertiser ought to advertise locally because it supports their community. There are some complications. I'm a little wary of having government spending ads because they can play favorites, and it's a method that local elected officials can use to wield influence. I don't know that question has really been vetted out through the New York and Chicago proposals. So I think we got to look carefully at those before they keep going. You can set up a program that gives a mayor or a city council member or somebody in administration a lot of influence over which publications thrive and which do not. And I think that's really problematic. But I said I was going to give time for questions. I think I've blathered on quite a bit. Does anybody have any questions?
You're right on time, actually. You have 10 minutes left.
Okay, great.
I have a question. My question was just if you could clarify a bit more what you meant by vouchers. Is it just subsidies directly to a paper?
Yes, this was actually the proposal in Seattle is modeled on the Seattle democracy vouchers. I don't know if you're familiar with that, but there's a property tax proposal. It was like 5 years ago or something like that in Seattle, or 9 years ago, I guess, in Seattle, to collect property taxes. It generates about $3 million a year. The city elections office sends every registered voter in Seattle gets a packet of these coupons, basically, or $25 coupons that you can send to a political candidate. Now, most people just throw them away. In fact, if there's not enough money to use all of them. Most of them do end up recycled or whatever. But the idea was to kind of offset the influence of big money in politics. It came about after the Citizen United stuff and all that. And I think it's been a debacle, boondoggle. I don't think it's worked very well. But the people there are some East Coast political types, the think tanks that are really gung-ho about Seattle's democracy vouchers, and they want to extend that to news. The idea would be you'd raise property taxes to create a pool of money in Seattle, maybe $5-10 million a year, and then people would receive coupons. There was a proposal at the federal level in the tax credit deal to give every household $250 tax credit to subscribe to local news. I think that was terrific. Canada has something similar. Hasn't worked out super well in Canada. I mean, its usage hasn't been great. It's a little bit complicated. The vouchers go a different direction, though. The people proposing the vouchers aren't as enthusiastic about for-profit news, and so you couldn't use these coupons for a news subscription. You could use them to make donations. So you could send it to public television, or you could send it to whatever. The news organizations would kind of have to set themselves up to receive these donations. The DC proposals like that as well. DC has it's kind of like the Safeway grocery program, it's like it's a loyalty program almost. The DC one has, it's really complicated. People would make donations to a certain group, and the groups would they'd count up who got the most donations, and then this committee from the city would dole them out based on the ratio. I mean, it's a mess. I don't think it's a very good idea. But take a look at my column, st.news/save the free press. I've got a column about that. Or the Seattle Times editorial board wrote about it last week too.
I wanted to ask one question related to that, and I know Joanne Lisowski has a lot of background about this, but Briar, you may as well. In terms of government support for public media. I understand the United States is way below many more countries in the world, and I'm hoping maybe either Briar or Joanne can speak to that briefly. And then I want to make sure I get a question here from that Carolyn Berger sent here. I'll follow up with that.
Well, sure. We have PBS, of course, but we historically have had a very rich, independent, for-profit, news system in the United States. I mean, we had up till 15, 20 years ago, we had 8,000 local newspapers. Now we're down to about 6,000 local newspapers. And those were supported basically by the economies and the communities in which they operated. So yes, we don't maybe the federal government doesn't directly support as much news like you might do in, say, the UK, where you have BBC or something like that, or in Scandinavian countries where they have a more direct subsidy. But we had a system that supported local news. That system is kind of falling apart. How do we fix that? Should we pivot towards a more state-funded system, or should we try and restore the kind of the galaxy of independent news outlets? I'm more in favor of the independent news outlets and finding a way for them to be self-sustaining, because that avoids dependency on the government. But it's probably going to be a little bit of both. Whatever happens, the league position is that control of content, no matter what the funding source is, must always remain with the publisher. Joanne, do you want to jump in? Do you have something to add related to?
Well, I mean, the press has always, or began as a partisan in this country. It began, the press was supported by political parties. That's the way it started. But when broadcasting came on, the decision was made in this country to go commercial, exactly what Briar said, to use the commercial model. Much of the rest of the Western world has sort of a hybrid public service model and commercial model. And their public service model in the BBC has been the model for almost all of the public service models in the world. They do have a stopgap measure where the government has no control over what happens at the BBC, because it's controlled by an outside entity, much like our public Corporation for Public Broadcasting. But as far as what we're doing to support things, it sounds like if we don't pay attention to this, we might revert back to that original model for newspapers in this country, which is a partisan press. So I think that's something that we might not want to see happen. But when you're looking at broadcasting and government support's maybe 25%. So people that want to pull the plug on government support of public broadcasting because it's going wild and we're supporting them, we're not really supporting them that much.
We have a question in the chat. I've read a lot about second language papers disappearing, especially Spanish and Chinese. Are they included in the various solutions you're talking about? I think, Briar, this is directed at you. On top of losing Spanish language station KUNS, this is a major blow to democracy and keeping voters informed. I know the Seattle Times owns the Yakima, the El Sol de Yakima. Is some of your community-funded journalism funding going to support the Del Sol? That's a second part to this question for me.
Sure. Yeah. Regarding Yakima, it has a different model than the Seattle paper does. In Seattle, we have 27 positions in our newsroom are funded by philanthropic partnerships, where philanthropies want to see more coverage of things like education and mental health. They have no say over the coverage other than sort of investing in topic areas. Yakima has some public funding and grants. We have fellowship type reporters there and things like that do benefit El Sol, but it's a little bit of a different one. As far as the ethnic media, yes, they absolutely would benefit from either the tax credits. They particularly benefit from those. They would also benefit from the antitrust proposal, they could negotiate with the platforms individually or collectively or as part of a news association. There are various trade groups in the news business. There are kind of big umbrella ones that represent newspapers and broadcasters, there are ethnic media organizations. Probably what would happen if that bill passes is that those different trade groups would negotiate on behalf of their members. But the legislation as written would allow any 2 or more news outlets could collectively get together and collectively bargain a content arrangement with Google and Facebook. So absolutely, yes, they would benefit from that.
I see Joanne had a question, as did Alexandra Baker.
I just wanted to say, maybe Sally Hale could step in here, because in part of the report that we did for the League of Women Voters, we actually looked at the financial situations happening in ethnic press around the state. And Sally, sorry to put you on the spot, but I think it was part of the good news that we actually got to portray in the study.
I wasn't really involved in that part. I talked to nonprofits.
Right.
That was mine, but none of the ethnic publications. I don't know, Deanne, were you involved?
Yeah, I was.
I'm sorry.
To a great deal, there was really, particularly through the pandemic, there was great support because a lot of the ethnic publications really focus much more on community engagement and all, and there's a real deep sense of loyalty, it seemed, and people were reporting that ethnic papers were not being hit as hard during the pandemic. I don't know how that is right now, though.
Right.
Alexandra, I want to get time for you.
Thank you. My question's a follow-up question. So I teach 12th grade civics at a public school, and the population I serve is increasingly multilingual. I was really excited to hear about Del Sol as a reliable news outlet I could direct my Spanish-speaking students to. I was wondering if you guys have any recommendations for Russian and Chinese, since those are the 2 other most common languages other than English spoken in my schools.
Do you know if Carol is on this call, Sally or Joanna?
I don't see her.
In our study, we do list some what we call ethnic publications, and so that might be a place. But frankly, I don't know that we ever encountered any Russian language publications. But if you want to check out our study, and it is free online. It's also available on Amazon at cost of $9.72.
And I can put it in. I can put it in the chat too.
Oh, great!
I
Thank you.
thought about doing that.
Thank you.
Briar, thank you very much. Wait, we have Carolyn Berger. One more question.
I just want a brief comment. You guys still have a sports desk at the Seattle Times, and not all newspapers still have that. And while it doesn't seem connected to what we're talking about necessarily, it brings people together. It's in a polarized society, a way for people to connect. And kudos to you guys for still having that. The LA Times doesn't have that anymore, which is tragic. So there, thank you.
I agree.
Thank you. Yeah, I think it's super important. It's important for our business. I mean, it brings a lot of people pay for that, and it supports a lot of our public service journalism is supported by the audience that the sport provides. Also, it's a great gateway to news for people. Even if they don't, they might think, oh, I don't care about what's going on in the city or the county or the state or whatever. I just want to find out how the Seahawks did and read the column about whatever Geno Smith this week. Still, there's sort of a serendipity thing. You might happen to see the story then, and especially for you kids. I mean, that's the way a lot of people, what they're playing football or basketball or baseball or whatever, and they want to go see their teams in the paper, and that's their introduction to reading local news, which is super duper important. I'm a little bit worried because you can get a lot of that stuff online now, so people in places that are just siloed sports only. And I mean, maybe Alexandra might, the sports page is a great way for your 12th graders to kind of get interested in looking at the newspaper. And maybe they'll happen upon a story about the government while they're looking at it.
Briar, thank you very much for joining us today. And I'm sure I'll get more questions. I'll forward your way. So thank you.
Excellent. I'll sign off then. Thank you all. Good. I really appreciate your support.
Thank you. Okay. I want to just talk briefly here about 2 pieces of legislation that is related to local news, certainly, and it's about news media literacy or media literacy. As I mentioned, we have two bills that we're looking to back this session. 5102, whose primary sponsor is Senator Lisa Wellman, and Substitute Senate Bill 5626. I'm going to go really quickly because I want to get into the opportunity for Joanne Lisowski to really kind of make this all tangible, show us the importance of this kind of training. So I'm just giving you the nuts and bolts here. 5102 is really about teacher librarians, and the law would require each district to have a policy that every student has access to school library information and technology programs via a trained teacher librarian. And it requires the school boards to provide resources to operate such programs. And in the smaller districts, maybe more rural districts, the bill would allow non-certificated staff to be replaced by, or not replaced, but to use non-certificated staff if we just don't have access to certificated staff. And then it did pass this last year in the Senate, 2820. It got hung up in the House Appropriations Committee, so it goes back to the Senate in January. I talked to the sponsor, Senator Wellman's legislative aide. He said he wasn't made aware of any problems per se with the bill. And he thinks that perhaps the committee just ran out of time. That's hard to know. We weren't there in the hearings. Then I spoke with a Southwest Washington lawmaker who said it was a good bill, this librarian teacher training program. But she's saying, one of the issues is really libraries need full funding, and that should be a priority. And the Washington Library Association is really one of the key supporters of this. So just briefly, the other bill that we're following and we will be supporting and advocating for is the 5626, and that was introduced by Senator Marco Lias. It requires the Office of the Superintendent of Public Instruction to create a program to expand media literacy and digital citizenship in subject areas, and to support a cadre of teachers to train other teachers to teach media literacy. Similarly, it was actually a huge 44, I can't even see my screen, 44-4. It too got hung up in the House, and so it will appropriations, and it will come back to the Senate. And the Washington lawmaker that I spoke to said, and she happens to be a teacher as well, she's really this if she had her druthers, she would really say this bill is a greater priority. Again, she's a teacher. Kids have so much access to social media, they need the skills to be able to decipher what is trustworthy and what is not. And it is primarily supported by the Washington State Council for the Social Studies. Our position, as I mentioned earlier, that we passed, includes an element or a function here that we believe media literacy and news education including support for journalism students, that pipeline that Breyer was referencing, is essential, and that these opportunities should be expanded in schools and throughout the communities. So I'm not going to take much more time because I want Joanne here to have an opportunity to kind of bring to life what we're talking about when we describe media literacy. Joanne?
Well, hi, I just wanted to make one more point to Alexandria. I was working at the Northwest Detention Center and with an attorney, and we desperately needed a Russian translator. We went to the church, the Russian church in town, and found somebody. So I don't know if that's going to help, but I know there's quite a few Russian churches, and he was not a native Russian speaker. I mean, he was somebody who had learned Russian, so he had a little bit of trouble doing translate, and he wasn't a professional translator, but I mean, you might find some help at the church. That would be my only suggestion.
And I have found like trustworthy translators. I guess my concern is when I tell students go do research on the internet and they find Russian language news sources.
Oh, interesting. RT.
That's I don't want them finding their way there. So
Well,
that's
that's why they need media literacy, because they would learn about Russian television, RT, if they took a media literacy class, believe me.
But I have refugees from Ukraine who just got here. So I don't have, right? Like,
I know,
yeah.
Well, good luck to you.
Thank you.
I appreciate everything that you do. I'm hoping that people can see my screen, yes?
Mhm.
Okay, so I maintain that if we had more media literacy about 20 years ago, we wouldn't have the crisis in local news right now, because people would know the value of journalism in local news, but that's passed over the bridge already. So now we're working on it. I also think that it's not just school children that need media literacy. I think it would be a valuable, incredibly valuable service if the league or some organization could offer media literacy education to adults. I started doing that in 1980s at a public television station. We offered media literacy classes for adults. And that was during the transition from analog to digital. So a lot of people were interested in what the heck is happening to my TV. So we got some people who would come in and actually learned about who owns the TV stations in town. How do you get things changed at a TV station? How do you get your views heard? So it was much more, I think it would be valuable now too. What I'm going to do today is just talk a little bit about the background in media literacy education. I'm going to do a deep dive into the actual law that passed in 2017 in Washington State. And these mandates or these bills that you see coming up now would be addendums to that bill. Key questions in media literacy education, which are really fun and all adults should be using. And the fun part actually is going to be a variety of tools that I will be sharing with schools, this teacher training that I'm doing in Spokane Public Schools. I will be sharing these tools and much more. You're just getting a very taste of the tools that are out there. And we'll get to play a little bit. How much time, I want everybody to think about this a little bit. How much time did you spend with media yesterday? And when I'm talking about spending with media, I'm talking about had a screen in front of your face. How much time did you spend with a screen in front of your face? And I'm going to give you a few minutes to think about that. How many hours?
Don't give us too much time. You only have 21 minutes left.
Thanks. So I want everybody to post it in the chat. Post in the chat what you came up with. Yes, anytime, Carol, anytime there's a screen in front of your face, let's do. Screen, you're touching a screen or you're looking at a screen. So I'm going to move on and let you know what the national average is. I think. In the United States in 2022, average was 13 hours and 11 minutes. So it looks like folks here are doing pretty well. I don't see anybody over 10. This is pretty interesting when you consider how much 13 hours, when you consider there are only really about 12 hours after you sleep, right? Or 12 or 16 hours maybe after you sleep, and 13 of them are in front of a screen. And this doesn't count children. So the reason that the idea of media literacy happened was it came about when probably first when film was introduced in the 1920s, because people were worried about film impacting the youth, and there were several studies done that said film is bad. Also, at that time, the French were looking at media literacy from a different perspective on how to create media. So they were being very critical on how media is created, not so much the effects. But this concern about media effects have existed since Plato. Plato was worried that when you put something in print, that people can misuse it. So it's been, this whole idea of disinformation has been around since Plato. The 1960s was when the US was proliferating the world with media, movies, TV, radio, music, we owned it. So much of the rest of the world was consuming it, and teachers and educators started to notice that the kids in Australia knew more about American Indians than they knew about Aborigines. So they said, oops, our culture is being taken over. Cultural imperialism is what they called it. Our culture is being taken over. We need to do something to stop this. So they mandated media literacy education, or they at least started to introduce it. So we need that, I think, even more now with the effects of all of the media. We're just getting bombarded regularly all the time with media. So this idea of figuring out what's going on behind the screen, I think, is a really important thing to do. What's the first North American country to mandate media literacy education? And if you get an extra prize if you know the year, put that in the chat. There's no guesses, huh? Canada, 1997. Again, you can see why. They were dealing with media traveling across the border and taking over their young people. They made it mandatory media education. They also have stipulations on how much media can be presented in their country, has to be original from their country, has to be created in Canada by Canadians. And that's on TV, film. They have those kinds of mandates in their legislation. So how many US states have mandated media literacy education? You know one, because I already gave that one away, right? Any ideas how many US states? Throw it in the chat. Is that 11, Alexandra? 6, Blair? You're getting 8? We're doing better than people expect. Here's the media literacy policy report that comes out every year. And I can show you that right now. 18 states have media literacy education language on the books. So not horrible, but when you consider Canada started in 97, we're a little bit behind the curve here. And if you look at Washington, here's what's happening in Washington. They talk about, they passed the media literacy model bill. They still, you can tell from the legislation that's happening right now, they still really haven't got a curriculum developed yet that's been mandated. They're working on it. The whole idea that this new bill, the second bill that Deanne talked about, the whole idea this is happening is because they don't want this media literacy and digital citizenship to be pigeonholed, and they want it to be across the curriculum, which certainly is the best for everyone. It's easier for the teachers to figure out how to incorporate it. It's better for the students to realize that media affects every subject that they deal with. And I was going to add to Breyer's comment about sports and education. I taught my nephew about statistics by looking at the baseball stats that were in the newspaper. So, I mean, there's math, there's science in there, there's geography, there's so much that they can, if they add media to these subjects, it's really going to be incredibly interesting and fun, I think fun for the student. Any questions at this point? I want to kind of get out of this and I'm not sure how I do.
Joanna, I know some of the discussion about 5626 is to integrate these lessons into the learning standards when they come up for revision. And I think that's probably what you're talking about, right?
Yes. So that it becomes more organic in education and not just pigeonholed in the library. Here's media literacy when you look at it from the perspective of Washington State. You can see that it's a little bit convoluted, which is why we need all these extra laws to keep coming up. They were much better in describing digital citizenship, but it included media literacy, ability to access, evaluate, develop, produce, and interpret. You're going to see that come back up when I'm talking to you about how media literacy is described today, internationally and nationally. Educational technology, that part of it just doesn't make sense to me. I guess they're trying to help with access. Critical thinking, Carol, is exactly what it is. It's primarily, that's what it is. Admit to main session. I don't know why I got that question. It's fundamentally, that's what it is. And it really forces the students to think critically, which is what I love about it. It's an easy way to introduce critical thinking skills. Okay. And why can't I go back to here? Okay. So here's the definition that I pulled from the Center for Media Literacy. You can see that they're looking at it as a 21st century approach to education. So in other words, infused into everything, because it is. It's a framework here. We're seeing again, access, analyze, evaluate, create, and participate. The idea of media literacy is not just to be a critical thinker of somebody else's media, but to critically think about the media that you construct. And boy, that helps when you start talking about things like bullying in the schools. I mean, learning that what you construct and what you put out there could have a serious effect on somebody else if you don't think about it, if you don't think critically about what you produce. Build understanding, of the role of media in society. And that's where we talk about the whole idea of journalism and local journalism. Why is this kind of media, this local journalism, why is that important to society and fundamentally to democracy? Those are things that you get involved in when you talk about media literacy and news literacy education. Let's see. I keep jumping over. Okay, so the key questions. I want you to remember these key questions because I'm going to go back to them. Who created this message? Who created the message?
Joanne, I'm going to jump in here. This
Okay.
could be a response to Carolyn Berger's question about providing parents with tools on media literacy as part of this. So these are questions, for instance, we could coach young people, grandchildren or children to ask them, right? Okay.
Constantly. In fact,
response-
my argument again is every adult should be asking these questions too. This is just for kids.
Thank you.
It's not like tricks. Tricks are for kids, but this is more than tricks. All of these are for adults. Every adult should ask this about every message that they deal with every single day that comes in mediated to them. Who created it? And then as far as the tools, I have got in the last slide, you're going to be inundated with tools. Let's see. I keep going that way. What creative techniques did they use to attract my attention? That's what I love about teaching media literacy too, is you teach them the tools, the persuasive tools that media use to get you to change your mind. And they learn those and they start deconstructing media messages. I taught a middle school class last summer. And they kind of, after they started to really integrate this into everything that they were doing, they started to come into class mad at me because they said, you've ruined it. You've ruined everything now. I can't watch anything. I can't look at an ad without going, how come they're doing that? Why are they doing that? And why are they using that color? So be prepared if you do get into media literacy education, they get mad at you at first. How might different people, and this is the cultural understanding thing, how might different people understand this message differently from the way I am interpreting it? Really interesting when you start delving into this and asking students to look at this. And then what values, lifestyle, points of view are represented in or omitted from this message? Do you think they've done a comprehensive list here? This is the key question that, oh, you know what they're missing? Why? Why was this message created? Why did they want me to see this? Why was this targeted at me? What was the end result that they were hoping for? Because as you'll see when I get to the core constructs, all message are constructed for a reason. All media message they're not just hazardous and haphazard. Media message are constructed using a creative language with its own rules. Again, when you teach them in the rules, they start to learn how to deconstruct the messages. Different people experience the same media message differently. Thousands and thousands of studies have done this, and it's lovely to bring these into the classroom and show them the research studies that have found this out. Media messages have embedded values and points of view, no doubt about it. Somebody was doing this for a reason, and they had a point of view that they wanted to convince you of. I see some. And so these are also tools that the parents should be able to use and explain. I mean, these are things that in Australia they teach second graders. This is a second grade class right now, that media messages are constructed for a reason. Most media message are organized to gain, profit, or power. When they learn that, it changes everything. And again, adults could learn that. Now we're getting into the fun part. How much time do I have?
You have 7 minutes, I think.
Oh, June. Oh, shoot. Okay. Well, I'm probably gonna skip Snopes. Although Snopes is a good place for you to. Has anybody heard of Snopes before?
Oh, yeah. Mhm.
So Snopes actually has a section on media literacy, which I love.
Corrected. You have 10 minutes, but I don't know if
Okay.
you can allow for a few minutes for questions.
What I love in Snopes is all of these media literacy help. No, you know what Snopes is? Snopes is the organization that debunks all the information that out there. You can go to, did Henry Kissinger turn down an open AI board seat just days before he died? You go down there, fake. So you put things in that you're reading and you're like, what? Whoa, is this true? You go to Snopes and they tell you. But the media literacy page that I love, and you can do this later, if you go into this 4 tips for spotting AI generated pictures, there's actually a video in there about how wonderful AI is. And it's going to make our lives so wonderful. And it's being used for health issues. And then you ask the students to go in and figure out who made that video. Why do you think they made that video? They're making it all positive. So that you ask them to go in and find out and uncover who made this, and you find out it's an AI company, right? And it looks like a news story. It looks just like a news story. So let me see if I can get out of here. So that's Snopes. I've got Common Sense Education is a fantastic organization that puts out this school actual curricular with tests and everything. They have middle school lessons, high school lessons, all developed by professionals. There's for educators. Look here too for parents. Can you see that where I'm circling? The for parents section. Our work and our impact. This is an organization that I have done the work and I've delved into them, and I've just determined that this is a legitimate place that has good info. Digital citizenship is also what they have here is videos, whole lesson plans. So Alexandria, whole lesson plans, and all kinds of them. Let me see if I get. And I was actually planning to go into some of these lesson plans. There's a fabulous one, our targeted political ads deceiving voters. This is one that the league should put up on their website. Can you hear this?
Most of the money in politics in America is spent on advertising.
A lot of what you see is designed to provoke a reaction out of you.
Whether it's Coke or Pepsi or the president, all of those things can be sold to consumers or voters. I'm Chara Torres Feliciano. So
you can get just a very basic taste of this. videos are really well made. Another thing that I really liked on this site is the best news sites for classrooms. I don't know how many of you know about Channel One. Channel One fortunately went away. Channel One used to bring TVs and cable into classrooms, and they would invite, or I think they required classrooms to play Channel One 10 minutes a day. It was probably 75% ads for sugary drinks and cereal. And then you had this snippet of news. And they were like so proud of themselves that they were bringing news into the classroom. Well, people started to figure this out, and they actually went away, I think, in 2017. But best news apps for school, Time for Kids, the Learning Network, Newsella, News to You. I've used that one, great resource, and you can see it's grades 2 to 8. Some of these, some of them do charge, and that's why News to You is charged, but some of them are free. Okay. Oh, this media bias chart is so much fun. This is another thing to really show to students. And I should show to all of you. Can everybody see the media bias chart? So let me see if I can get rid of that. Put an X over there. So you can zoom in. Oops, I'm sorry. What did I just do? And see your favorite channel. Looks like CBS Evening News is considered the least biased, in the middle, and the most reliable. The thing that's fun is if you dig deeper into where this chart was made, you can see that CBS News is one of their clients. So again, this is a really fun thing to show to students, and you've got right and left on this. You can ask them, and what I like is they come up, socialist alternative, reliability score, their bias score. So it's just a fun thing for adults too. Again, I'm always clamoring for the adults.
Joanne, we have 5 more minutes in this session. I'm going to encourage people, if they have questions, to type them into the chat, and Joanne can take them as she's multitasking.
And
here.
I'm going to actually show, there's a whole bunch more. I have a whole website from Canada, and KQED has fantastic media literacy resources as well. And these are all linked, and this PowerPoint is going to go to Cynthia. So teachers out there, you can jump in and use this, and there's hundreds and thousands of lessons in this page right here. I'm done. Questions?
Any questions for Joanne? An atta-girl there for you. No questions.
Well, they need a chance to type them in.
Okay. Thank you all for participating, and please do consider watching what we're doing as we progress in efforts to go national with our position. Again, encourage your local league president to send delegates to the convention in Washington, D.C. And if you know other league official or people in leagues elsewhere in the country, consider, and if you know their interest in local news and democracy, please consider sending information about them to me at this email address, dfinken@leagueoflwvwa.org. We do want to get a message out that we're trying to take this national. So retired communications professor Sandra Herndon, thank you. Thank you.
Well, and I noticed that Alexandra said that they're using common sense. I just love it. It is so comprehensive. And then I'm not sure if it's that website, but there's another one that I'm not even sure I included, because there's one that actually you can go into the Washington State and it'll tell you what codes, what standards this lesson attaches to. So, I mean, that's great for people who are developing curricula for schools. It actually, you can click on it and it goes to the Washington State page and says, this lesson will accommodate this standard. I mean, that's how much work has been done in the background.
Thank you, Joanne. Thank you all for participating today.